exciting for me because I do a lot of training and talking about child's right and participation, and in so many topics and so many issues of children's lives, but it's the very first time I've been asked to speak about it in the context of sports at all and coaching, which seems incredible. And I think that's why it's so important that this is happening, that you have this initiative. I was looking at these concepts of fun, freedom and belonging that Sean talked about. And of course, that completely fits with a general child rights and child rights respecting perspective. So I'm really, really pleased to be here. I'm going to focus today on the right to be heard, and I'm going to describe my understanding of what that is before raising some questions with you about how that might work in your context, which I think Debbie's already answered some, but we'll see how it goes. Debbie mentioned Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This is one of the most innovative parts of the Convention. It's actually one of the most controversial, and I think we can't get away from that in any context, and I'm sure including sport, that there are some people that actually don't really accept that children should be telling adults what to do as it's seen, that actually in ways, this is the one that causes resistance and controversy, because some people think adults know best and should be just adult expertise should be telling children what to do, and then children should be doing it. But that's not what the law says. The law says that a child who's capable of forming a view has the right to express it freely, and that view must be given due weight. Very few people I know can recite Article 12 verbatim. It's quite complex provision, quite convoluted. And what happens then is then it gets shortened, which I'm going to come to. Who does it apply to? And I think this is something I'd really like to get involved in the discussion today. It's a right of individuals' children, but it's also a right of groups of children. So how does that play out in sports and coaching? I'm curious, because clearly you have children making individual decisions about what they want to play, what they want to play, who they want to play with, when, how, and that needs respected. But then, of course, we have clubs and we have societies and we have teams. So at the team level, and I think Debbie's work showed that really clearly, you can see the children developing their own team and they need to be heard in their own team. And then in your club, and then in your sport, and then at national policy level, this right applies all the way up from the individual child to the national policy level. Which decisions does it apply to? I like this quotation from the committee. The Committee on the Rights of the Child says that we should listen to children when their perspective will enhance the quality of solutions. And I think if you have it in the head, where will they help us out? And I think what Debbie was showing was they help us out everywhere. For every decision that was happening, those children had strategies, they had ideas, they were able to discuss them. And that's what we should. So where is sport feature in this? We think about sports, we think about coaching. Debbie already mentioned the Article 31, the right to play in the convention. It's more than the right to play, it's to engage in play and recreational activities appropriate to their age. It's rest, it's leisure, it's all of that. You know, it's quite a neglected provision. We call it the forgotten provision in the convention. And we think it's forgotten because it's not taken as seriously, like it's not important. But of course, what we know from all the research that is in fact that play, sport, leisure and rest is crucial as well, that this could in fact be the most important provision in the convention. And we also know that if children had been asked, children did not draft the convention that protects them, which is one of our concerns about it. If children had been asked to draft the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and I've asked children what they would put into it, you would have a much stronger and bigger emphasis on play, sport and leisure. So where am I in this? Going back 17 years ago, I conducted a research study in Northern Ireland where we asked children about all aspects of their lives. And what came out of that for me was this big disconnect. I am a lawyer and I knew the legal text, which I showed you in my first slide. We were talking to adults in children's lives, including in sports and our sports council and their coaches and their PE teachers and others. And we were and their lawyers and social workers. And we were asking them about listening to the views of children. None of them had heard of Article 12, but they would say, oh, no, we'd say about involving children. Of course, we do that. We've got a big thing on the voice of the child. We have a big thing about capturing their voices. It's really important to us in professional discourse. But in the middle, what children then and children still tell us is that often their views are not sought at all. If their views are sought, they're not taken seriously. Or if they try to suggest their views, and this is a really significant thing, so they're not sought and they're not asked, but children try to say, we don't want to do it this way, we'd rather do it this way, this is what we think. They quite often get dismissed and sometimes put down. They're considered to be challenging authority, challenging professionalism, and they're considered to be cheeky. And this is what this image tries to capture. It was drawn in the context of family life, not sports. But this is a mother saying, you shouldn't be telling me what to do. And the child saying, but I was just trying to tell you what I think. Now, as an adult, we would not expect to be put down. If we were trying to say what we thought about some decision that was being made for us, you wouldn't expect that response. But children expect that response. And because of that, sometimes they don't offer any opinion at all. So this got me thinking, this disconnect about this notion of these abbreviations, voice of the child, or the right to have a say, or the right to be heard. Now, we all use them. I have to use them because you can't quote all of Article 12. But I decided back then that I was really concerned about some of them because they were, each of these abbreviations was potentially going to undermine implementation, which is one of my key areas of interest. They're imperfect and they can potentially undermine implementation. And I came up with a new academic model at the time, it was, where I said voice is not enough. It's not about voice, it's about space, creating the conditions. It is about voice, it's also about audience who's listening, and it's about influence, what's happening. And it needs to be understood, as Debbie was saying, in the context of the broader convention, non-discrimination, best interest, being safe, which of course is crucial and has driven some of the rights agenda in sport. It has to be understood in that wider context. So those are the four concepts: space, voice, audience, and influence. And I'm going to take you through, I'm not going to read that out because there's no point, because I'm going to take you through each of them now. Space, it has to be assured to the child, which is a really strong legal obligation. So you don't wait till children and young people come and say to you, we would like to do this. You have to actively create, as Debbie showed, the conditions where their views are sought, and they're given space to form their views, and they're given space to express their views. It's active. It needs to be a safe space. This cannot be more crucial. It needs to be a space where children are not afraid of rebuke or reprisal. Okay, and I'm not talking about the coaches or the trainers as well. We understand from our own research that the peer reaction is often really important to them. So you need to create the conditions where all children aren't worried about saying something in case of someone else is going to put them down. You're trying to create that very respectful space, and it needs to be an inclusive space, which is great. I could see it in your charter. This is for all children, and that you have, the rights are for all children. So whether that child, has a disability, whether it's a girl or a boy, or ethnicity, or what language they speak, it's making sure that all children can be heard, and that might create, necessitate creating new ways to seek their views. So that brings me to voice. Crucially, this is a right and not a duty. So children don't have to be involved. If they don't want to be involved, don't make them, because it's a right, not a duty. They can decide whether they want to be involved, and sometimes that's about creating the right conditions, but it shouldn't ever be forced to give their views if they don't want to. What helps that is giving choice in the mode of expression. So some children will be really confident speaking out loud and sitting in the circle. Some children might be hanging back and want to whisper in the coach's ear. Some children might want to tell their friend, who might want to put set for them. It may be that you need to create areas where there are confidential surveys, little online things, but actually you need to give choice, because not all children will be confident, like not all adults will be confident in speaking in the same way, and for instance, in public. This is the one thing that's misunderstood about the convention. This right to be heard is capable of all children who are capable of forming a view. It is not restricted in any way by age or maturity. The weight given to the views is balanced with age and maturity. The right to be heard is not in any way. If a child is capable of forming a view, and they'll express it, and whether that could be non-orally, whether that's because they cry, whether that's because they scream, whether that's because they get angry, if they're showing what they're feeling about something, it's trying to read that language sometimes as opposed to then giving an articulate response. And they may actually need help to form a view. If you ask them, what position they want to play, they might know, they might not, and they might need help with that. If you ask them that you've set up your club and you're trying to decide what your priorities for your club are, or what fundraising you're going to do, they may need options. And as Debbie was saying, she doesn't go with nothing. She goes and says, here's some ways I'm thinking about, what do you think about? And that's helping children to form and express their own views, giving them some choices they can work through. Audience, this is the bit where I think the model became famous, because this was neglected. We have a lot of activity which collects children's views, and not a lot of understanding about where they go, what happens to them, and actually children themselves seeing that. So the audience concept, it's not just being heard, it's being actively listened to. and it's creating channels of communication. So if you're asking a child their views, they should know where their views are going, and they should know who's listening. They should know what that person's going to do. They should know if that person has the authority, power, influence, money, inclination to help them. And if they don't, they need to know where they can get their views to, so the right person hears them. So again, in your club, there will be people who have certain responsibilities and others that don't. And I think it's been really clear about who they are and who the children's views should go to. And finally, the Holy Grail, which is influence. So this is the point where you say that views are given due weight in accordance with age and maturity. Okay, so this potential has the potential to undermine the whole thing, where adults take views, listen to them and go, well, actually, that wasn't really sensible. You know, and again, this is really not what rights respecting is about, because of course, sometimes children, less often, as Debbie showed, than you think, do they say things that can't work or won't work. But it's not about putting them down. It's ensuring that you respond to that and you give them feedback about what was able to happen, what was not able to happen, why, if you couldn't do something that children wanted, why not? And is there another strategy? Is there another way around that? I said back in 2007, when I wrote the model, we need to create the conditions where we make it uncomfortable to solicit views and then ignore them. And I know I'm having time for today, but where my current work is on feedback. I think feedback is crucial. It needs to be fast, it needs to be full, it needs to be accessible to them, and it needs to be followed up, but that's a different talk. In practice, the model I wanted to be legally sound and user-friendly. The original diagram was not user-friendly in any way, but lots of people have taken it and adapted it and made it their own. And these are just some examples. There's a report by UNICEF on adolescence, which incorporates my model into some other participation models. And I can put a reference in the chat box that I really, really like it. Jerison Lansdowne, who's a child participation expert, did that with a whole bunch of other global child experts, and you can just see, you know, my model in the different types of participation and context. Last year we did work for BBC Children in Need around their funding programs and setting up children's strategic governance for their funding, so that when they were deciding where money goes, the children are able to influence that and influence the types of projects and set up charters and principles for that as well. So to finish, I want to show what I think is the strongest example of it globally, and that is in the south of Ireland and Ireland. I'm so pleased that, you know, Sheila was here, that Ireland back in 2015 did something really unusual, not so unusual now. They created a whole government national youth participation strategy. So every government department had to set down action points at every level, okay? And that was a really significant thing to happen. And at that time, I worked with the Irish government's then policy officers to create this checklist of the Lundy models. These were questions you can ask yourself, primarily for policymakers, but has been used by an awful lot of people all over the world since. You know, have children's views been sought? Is there a safe space? How can you assure everybody? Very simple questions with yes or no answers. And that checklist has a life of its own. It's used by the World Health Organization now. But what was really brilliant about the strategy is, of course, it's no point having a strategy unless you've got action points and you've got specific targets. So they have across that strategy specific departments. You can see here Sport Ireland with Sheila here, and so I was really delighted earlier to see that what this is working, is that each of these publicly funded bodies would create an action point for itself, and then it was going to follow up how it was going to engage children and young people. And there are lots and lots of what has happened since then is organisations like Swim Ireland or the GAA, or in this case, their detention centre for young people in conflict with the law, or their child protection agency, have all got their own strategies based on the Lundy model, where they're engaging with all sorts of children and young people. So it has cascaded brilliantly because there was commitment to it. And I'm going to finish now with where we're at now, because this has been a really exciting development for us this year. In the last year, I have worked with Hub who are commissioned by the Irish government to do their child participation services. And we have developed a whole national framework of child participation. And what's so much better about this one is that we were not consulting with just policymakers. Hub consulted with sports organisations, with paediatricians, with teachers, with early childhood, with social workers, to develop a series of tools that are practical. This is one of them. This is a checklist if you were going to involve children and young people in your policy making, whether that is at your, you know, the club level again, or national level or regional level. You can ask yourselves these questions and to see if you're actually approaching it in a rights respecting way. And then two final tools, which are the two that I'm most excited about, is what came back from the consultations was that there was that people wanted an everyday checklist, a really simple thing that's now going to be a big poster that can go into schools and clubs and hospitals. And it's a very simple set of questions in everyday settings for people to think through. And I think the questions came from adults and from children and young people. So they're trying to implement, obviously, the Lundy model. And if you look at, for example, under voice, I mean, a really important question, tiny little questions, but in practice, they have really mega impact. How can they raise the things that matter to them? So often we go in with an adult agenda to say, well, we want to know in your context, you can tell me what it is, what's going to happen here, what do you think? But where do you create the space to say, right, what do we need to be talking about? What aren't we talking about that we need to talk about in this club or this team or with you as an individual person playing sport? Those are the questions that we've agreed, really simple. And then on the other side, and sorry, I think that the heading is gone. We worked with children and young people to do a little evaluation sheet, and they came back and they said, if they've done a consultation with in any context, they don't want to sit and write in a whole form or questionnaire. They wanted it to be one page. And these are the questions that we agreed with children and young people that would be asked to evaluate the quality of their participation. So you can see these are the questions, again, based on the model. I've been listened to from the start because often we're too far in for things to happen. I understood what was being discussed. I had enough time to talk. Cannot emphasize that more, enough. We often, as adults, just go too quick. Listen to me now, trying to get my talk in, and it's creating space for them to think and speak. They really value that. They know who wants to hear the opinions. They know why they want them, and they will be honest about what they can try and do. So that thing about being realistic with children, that whenever you're saying we're asking you this, but if there is no money, if there is no budget, if there is no time, it's being really honest about what you can do. And then of course, I knew where our opinions were going. What were the best things about today? What would you change? And if you go on down, there's things there about food and the accommodation. Okay, so to finish then, I just want to say, and I think Debbie made the exact same point, there is no one right way to do this. There's no one right way to do child participation. I think, the model that I have helps people think through the questions they should be asking, but it is always child, it is always context, and it is always context dependent, okay? And the decision that is being made. And those things help us determine what is appropriate, what is effective. But I think if you keep to the convention and you keep to these notions of space, voice, audience, and influence, it can give you a framework for thinking these things through very systematically.